I've always wanted to do that. Silence a whole room. Thank you very much to everyone for coming out to the very first evening of what will be, I think, an amazing 5-day festival of culture, literature, art, dance, film. I'm incredibly honored and pleased to be here this evening. When I was first asked to do this, I was very grateful to have a chance to speak with Kamel and Francine. I met Kamel about 5 years ago in Algeria. We were at a festival at the Salon du Livre in Alger. And while I was there, I was doing a panel very similar to this one, and we were talking about literature and politics. And at the end of the panel, somebody in the audience raised their hand and asked a question. And they said, "You are a writer, you come from Africa, you write about politics and literature, but are you an écrivain engagé?" And I said, of course I am, because like all Americans, we are deeply engaged. And then the person in the audience asked a follow-up question. He said, well, if you're such an engaged writer, who's the president of Algeria? And I've used this story many times, but I think this is perhaps the most pertinent evening to use it, because I couldn't imagine a better way of thinking about Kamel's work. It is a question that burns at the heart of his remarkable novel, The Meusault Investigation. When I was first asked to organize this event with Kamel as one of the authors, I think we knew right away that we wanted to break from some of the traditional bounds and borders that oftentimes bring writers together for very superficial reasons. We sometimes construct these very shallow similarities based on origin or culture, however broad and diffuse those words may be. And in doing so, I think we miss out on a much more peculiar and fascinating ties that bind writers like Kamel and Francine. There could have been a dozen other topics for this conversation with Francine and Kamel, and I think it's because both writers are remarkably fierce and singular voices of cultural and political criticism. Besides their fictional work, it's hard to think of two other writers who so deliberately and consistently challenge a conventional orthodoxy of ideas, whether it's aesthetic, or as certainly the case with Kamel and Francine, dangerously political. I remember reading in college an essay that Francine Prose wrote called "I Know Why the Caged Bird Can't Read," and thinking that's what a dangerous writer does. And I remember then thinking I remember thinking this evening that I'm very glad to say in front of many people that I'm a friend of Francine, because that means she can never review me.
For some places and not others.
As a journalist, Kamel's work is provocative in the fullest and I think most vital sense of that word. And not only critiques, but it challenges authority in all of its forms, from the religious to the political. And on the surface, Francine's extraordinary novel, Lovers at the Chameleon, seems to stand almost in opposition to the haunted landscape of Kamel's novel, The Meusault Investigation. But of course, as both writers reveal in their work, the surface, like facts, are merely the start of the story. Both novels, in their own and unique and dramatic way, are profound acts of recovery. The past, whether it's Paris in the 1920s or 30s, or post-colonial Algeria, are the backdrop for historical and literary resurrections. The seemingly marginal and all too times often forgotten characters from history haunt the pages of both of these novels. Francine Prose is the author of 20 works of fiction, which is a kind of astounding, surprising number, and the recipient of numerous literary awards, including the Dayton Literary Peace Prize and a finalist for the National Book Award. She's a member of the Academy of American Arts and Science, and also a member of the Academy of American Arts and Letters. That's like double being a part of the Académie Française. She gets to do it twice. Kamel Daoud is an Algerian novelist based in Oran, where he writes for the Quotidien d'Oran and the third largest French language newspaper. His articles have appeared in Libération, Le Monde, Le Courrier International, and are regularly reprinted around the world. His novel was a finalist for the Prix Goncourt and won the Prix François Mauriac et the Prix de 5 Continents de la Francophonie. International rights to the novel have been sold in 20 countries. And I believe this is also Kamel's third novel to have been published, the first in English. Please welcome me in joining and thanking Kamel and Francine for being here. So at the start of this evening, Francine suggested that we should just get Camus right out and bring him, let his presence enter the room. And rather than trying to sort of use The Stranger or even Camus' The Fall as an entry point into talking about both of these works, I was thinking about an essay from Camus titled in English, Create Dangerously. And there's a line in there where Camus argues that beauty is one of the only things that has never oppressed anybody. And I wondered how that actually compares to what happens in both Kamel's novel and Francine's book, where in Kamel's book, there's a wonderful line where his narrator talks about the gem-like prose of what would be Meursault's fiction or Camus' fiction. And in Francine's work as well, there's this wonderful critique and investigation of what happens when people try to use art or photography, in the case of your characters, to create beauty. I wonder that.
Does this work? Is this on? Can you hear me? Well, it's so interesting that Camus said that about beauty not oppressing anyone, because, and it's something I've always thought and always wanted to think, but it just so happens that last week, I teach at Bard, and in my Bard class, last week we read Bolaño's By Night in Chile, and some of you may know, and the narrator is a Chilean priest who's a literary critic and a poet who nonetheless has gone to work for the Pinochet regime, who's been who's tutored Pinochet basically in Marxism. So after reading that book, it really brought into question, and for me and my students, whether in fact that's true, whether beauty is completely neutral, whether beauty can't be used by people who want to oppress other people as well as it can be used by people who want to liberate people. So I'm it's something I've been thinking about actually for the last week. So I'm not sure anymore whether that's actually true.
It's for me.
Ouais, c'est pour toi.
Parfois, les questions sont plus belles que les réponses.
Sometimes questions are more beautiful than the answers.
Donc, je vais essayer d'être intelligent et vous répondre.
So I'm trying to be both intelligent and answer your question.
Je ne suis pas sûr que la beauté n'oppresse personne.
I am not so certain that beauty does not oppress anyone.
L'actualité le dément.
Current events contradict this.
Il y a des gens qui sont oppressés par la beauté et qui la tuent.
There are people who are oppressed by beauty and who then kill it.
La beauté est un enjeu, n'est pas uniquement une esthétique maintenant.
Beauty is a stake, it's not only an aesthetic.
Nous vivons dans un monde où la beauté est aussi un défi.
We are living in a world where beauty is also a challenge.
Je pense que beaucoup de gens ici dans la salle comprennent ce que je veux dire.
I think a lot of people here tonight understand what I'm talking about.
Il s'agit aussi d'une guerre.
It's also about a war.
On peut la nier,
You can deny it,
on peut la regarder,
you can watch it,
on peut l'enjamber.
you can step over it.
La beauté, pour moi, maintenant,
For me, beauty
Et-
nowadays
est une obligation d'engagement.
is an obligation of commitment.
Je défends ce qui est beau
I defend what is beautiful
parce qu'il s'agit de ma part d'humanité.
because it's my own part of humanity that I have.
L'adversaire veut tuer ce qui est beau
The adversary wants to kill what is
parce
beautiful
qu'il me refuse mon humanité.
because he refuses this part of humanity that I have.
On n'est plus dans l'esthétique.
We are no longer in an aesthetic.
And so I'm curious, though, when you're both writing your novels, because there are sort of striking moments of both sort of critiquing things that sort of resemble beautiful objects or beautiful representations of things that perhaps aren't so simple. And how conscious are you when you're trying to write those things? Are you that you are kind of deliberately aestheticizing something that perhaps isn't so easily aestheticized? And so, I mean, in Francine's novel, you have different types of narrative fiction, right? You have different writers whose prose actually changes according to who's telling the story, and different types of sentence structures that come closer to what we would think of as a kind of a beautiful approach to writing. And in Kamel's, in your novel, your prose itself seems to sort of, and the narrator seems to sort of very much interrogate the sort of the function of the sort of what we think of as the beautiful sentence in Camus' version of The Stranger.
Je crois que le beau vêtement fait partie de l'histoire d'amour.
I think that the beautiful outfit is part of the love story.
Le style est pour moi une exigence de sens.
For me, style is an exigency, a demand for meaning.
Ce n'est pas un accessoire.
It's not an accessory.
Quand on approche d'une manière habile le sens,
When you approach meaning in a clever way,
on finit par fabriquer du beau.
you end up fabricating beauty.
Dans ce que j'admire chez Camus, justement,
And what I really admire in Camus
c'est cet équilibre strict
is this very demanding equilibrium
entre la métaphore et le sens.
between metaphor and meaning.
Il y a des philosophes ou des penseurs qui pensent très très bien, mais qui écrivent très très mal.
There you have many philosophers who think beautifully but who write poorly.
Il y a le contraire.
And you also have the opposite.
Ça s'appelle le jeu de mots.
It's kind of the play
Et
on words.
on reconnaît le philosophe écrivain
And you can recognize the philosopher-writer
par ceci que la métaphore est quelque chose qui fait partie de son corps.
based on the fact that metaphor is something that's part of his body.
Chez Camus, il y a une tradition française
With Camus, you're dealing with a French tradition,
qui fait du style une obligation.
for which style is a form of obligation.
Donc, on n'est plus dans l'esthétique.
So we're no longer in an aesthetic.
À la limite, l'esthétique devient une question d'éthique, d'obligation.
And in the end, aesthetic becomes an issue of ethics, of obligation.
On écrit très très bien parce qu'on veut approcher le sens.
One writes very well because one wants to get as close as possible to meaning.
Et c'est tout.
And that's all.
Whoa. Well, I don't know. How can it's a hard thing to follow. I mean, I have to say that when I'm writing or when I'm thinking immediately about what I'm writing, I'm always sort of amazed and slightly horrified and even embarrassed by how little ideas and the world of ideas enters into what I'm doing. I mean, I'm just essentially trying to tell a story about something, trying to construct a narrative, and also trying to write sentences that seem to me beautiful in whatever way a sentence might be beautiful, rhythmic, cadence, metaphor, whatever, in all the ways that, and also not to tell any lies. That seems important to me. But only later, much later, do I think, oh, this is the idea I had, or this is, I mean, when I was writing Lovers at the Chameleon Club, all I knew was that I was taking this story that was loosely borrowed from history and turning it into a novel. But much, much later, I thought, oh, I'm writing about evil and about the origins of evil. But it had never occurred to me until the book was almost finished.
Yeah, and that's one of the wonderful links between these two books is they sort of both begin with these cultural artifacts. There's a sort of photograph that haunts over your novel, and there's obviously Camus' The Stranger that haunts over Kamel's book, and these artifacts become these sort of interesting entry points, and they both become entry points into characters and figures who are oftentimes, and especially now, kind of like the marginal figures in our culture, right? They're the characters who oftentimes we have slightly discarded to a certain degree.
Ok. Toute littérature est dissidence.
Any literature is a form of dissidence.
Sinon, on écrit, on fait ce que je fais du journalisme.
Otherwise, you do what I do, which is journalism.
Pour revenir à la question du style, par exemple,
To come back on the question about style, for instance,
je crois que le style est pour moi, c'est ce qui reste quand on écarte tous les mots
for
inutiles.
me, style is what remains once you have gotten rid of all the useless words.
Quand je veux écrire une histoire,
When I want to write a story,
j'ai besoin d'un point de vue dissident.
I need a dissident point of view.
Parce que c'est ce qui me permet de voir autrement le monde
Because this is what helps me to envision, to see the world in a different way.
et qui me permet de poser l'enjeu de ma liberté.
And this is also what enables me to set the stakes of my own freedom.
Je pense que toutes les histoires se résument à une seule.
I think that all stories can be summarized to just one.
C'est une défense de sa propre liberté
It's a defense of your own freedom
par rapport à une majorité.
faced in relation to a majority.
On est toujours dans la formule de l'outsider.
We're always in the formula, the structure of the outsider.
Sinon, on n'écrit pas des romans, on écrit des discours.
Otherwise, you don't write novels, you write speeches.
Je crois que cette dissidence est
And I think this form of
obligatoire.
dissidence is obligatory
pour pouvoir écrire.
in order to be able to write.
Et c'est ce qui fait la magie de la littérature.
And that's what's so magical about literature.
La littérature est ce qui fait sentir à chacun qu'il est unique,
Literature is what helps anyone feel unique,
alors qu'on est dans un partage commun.
whereas we're in this situation of sharing something that's common.
C'est assez paradoxal.
It's quite paradoxical.
La littérature est ce qui nous permet de penser qu'on est seul,
Literature is what helps us think that we're alone,
qu'on est unique
that we're unique,
et que le reste du monde est différent de nous.
and that the rest of the world is different from us.
Alors, un roman peut tout à la fois être publié en 1 million d'exemplaires,
So a novel could have a print run of 1 million copies,
avoir 1 million de lecteurs,
have 1 million readers,
et chaque lecteur est unique.
and each and every reader is unique.
Je crois que c'est pour ça qu'on arrive à vendre.
And I think that's why we're able to sell.
Well, I agree completely, and at the same time, part of the paradox is I think that literature makes us feel less alone. I mean, it makes us feel that whatever painful or apparently unique experience we've had is actually shared with other people. I mean, I remember many years ago, I was teaching at the University of Utah, and my students were all extremely devout Mormons and very frightened about saying or thinking anything that went against the tenets of the church. And just from pure mischief, I taught Flannery O'Connor's story, Everything That Rises Must Converge. And my students were shocked because it was so impermissible in their situation to think about one's parent in anything but less than a purely adulatory and adoring way. And to read a story about a young man who had nothing but shame and contempt for his mother was startling to them. And one by one, I saw my students begin to have an experience of thinking these thoughts that I thought were only mine, that I thought were shameful and had to be hidden, actually might have been experienced by other people. So that's another function that literature could have, which is to reduce our isolation at the same time.
Je pense que la littérature est tellement nécessaire
I think that literature is so necessary
que même Dieu n'a pas résisté à écrire 4 livres.
that even God was unable to resist writing 4 books.
Quand on fait le compte, il a créé
When you
un monde,
tally them up,
il a écrit 5 livres.
he wrote 5 books.
Donc je pense que cela s'explique
So I think there's an explanation for that.
par la solitude.
And the explanation is solitude.
But even the characters that sort of lie at the heart of both of these books are oftentimes characters who sort of lie outside of those sort of borders of power, right? They're the characters who are oftentimes the most vulnerable to institutions and functions and forms of power that oftentimes are trying to actually control their lives more than they're able to. So even with this idea that literature is one way of sort of kind of either affirming a kind of shared collective humanity or also bringing us together, it still seems to take place in both cases from characters who exist and live on a much more marginal extreme than most people do, right? That perhaps, and I'm curious if part of what you're both thinking about and consciously is to kind of bring some of those marginal figures out from the margins, is to sort of bring them back into kind of like a larger cultural representation, to rescue them even to some degree.
Well, rescue is such a nice construction to put on it. I mean, as I began to write, I mean, the main character, one of the main characters in my novel is a woman who many of you may know is based on Violette Morris, who was the French athlete and cross-dresser who was forbidden to compete athletically, and became a spy for the Germans and supposedly told the Germans where the Maginot ended, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, but as I began to write about her story, which is marginal, I became more and more interested, and again, it was what I was saying before about the way in which you begin a narrative, which is just a story, you're just telling a story, and then the larger themes begin to emerge. I began to be interested in the whole theme of resentment and the ease with which resentment can be manipulated by politics for really hideous reasons, and the way in which so much of 20th century history had to do with the manipulation of resentment, and it's still going on. It's still going on here. It's still going on in Europe. I mean, it's a huge and horrifying aspect of politics and history.
Je crois qu'à travers les époques,
I think that through different eras,
les dieux changent de nom.
gods changed their names.
Maintenant, on les appelle les institutions.
Now it is called the institution.
Et je crois qu'on est toujours dans la même dialectique
And I believe that we're still in the same dialectic frame
entre un homme qui résiste aux dieux
between a man who is resisting God
et des hommes qui obéissent.
and men who obey.
Donc, c'est assez pour parler. J'adore les mythes.
I love Lilith.
Les mythes.
I love myths. I love myths
Parce qu'ils expliquent beaucoup le monde.
because they shed a lot of light. They explain the world very well.
Et c'est vrai, c'est une logique interne.
And it's true that there's an internal logic.
La marge est ce qui permet d'éclairer le mieux le centre.
The margins are what help shed light in the best possible way on the center.
On ne peut pas parler de liberté sans dissidence.
You cannot speak about freedom without
On ne
dissidence.
peut pas parler d'amour sans chagrin.
You cannot speak about love without sadness.
C'est pas intéressant, les histoires d'amour qui réussissent.
It's not happy love stories are not interesting.
Un prisonnier qui parle de liberté
A prisoner who speaks about
est
freedom
plus intéressant qu'un homme libre.
is more interesting than a free man.
Un homme qui parle de malheur est plus intéressant qu'un homme heureux.
A man who talks about unhappiness is more interesting than a happy man.
Et un homme malheureux est plus bavard.
And an unhappy man is more talkative.
C'est ce qui explique beaucoup la littérature aussi.
And that also explains a lot about literature.
And I would argue it also does a wonderful job of. But both of your books have a sort of a slightly deceptive quality to them. They appear to be about, in this case, a cross-dressing woman who also goes on to have a remarkable career as an athlete, as a race car driver. But then, as you said, it also becomes profoundly about evil. It becomes so much about the rise of sort of totalitarian state and fascism in Europe in the 1920s and 30s, and how that rise begins to happen so quietly, that violence, that trauma sort of begins to seep its way into the novel bit by bit. And by the time you realize that the book is deeply concerned with that problem. And in Kamel's book, you see what seems to be this sort of very private, personal concern and a very seemingly literary concern kind of transform into a much more political concern about Algeria now, rather than being just about what happened with Camus and The Stranger and Meusault. It becomes much more about the contemporary state of Algerian culture and politics. So I'm curious about that sort of deceptive, and I say deceptive in the best possible sense, right? It's a seductive trait in both of your books.
Well, that's why it's fiction. I mean, you know, if we wanted to write essays, we would write essays. I mean, one of the things that fiction can do is it's a kind of sleight of hand, really. I mean, you're looking over here and watching the magician do this, and actually something else is happening over here. So you're telling a story. I mean, and it goes all the way back to Aesop and the Bible and so forth. You're telling a story that seems to be just a story, but actually a story is about all these other things that just emerge from the narrative, really.
Moi, je pense que c'est ce qui fait la différence entre l'anecdote et la littérature.
To me, that's what makes the difference between an anecdote and literature.
Je n'ai pas parlé dans le dernier livre de l'Algérie.
I didn't speak in this last book about Algeria.
Je pense que j'ai parlé d'une condition humaine.
I think I spoke about a human condition.
Qu'est-ce que ma liberté face à ceux qui veulent m'imposer quelque chose?
What is my freedom when I'm faced with people, others who are trying to impose something on me?
Je viens d'un pays qui est totalement invisible aux
I come
États-Unis.
from a country that's completely invisible to the United States,
Donc il est difficile d'être séduisant.
so it's difficult to be seductive.
Je viens aussi d'un pays qui organise l'invisibilité.
I also come from a country that organizes the invisible.
Donc, la littérature me permet de parler de l'humanité, mais
So-
de la rejoindre surtout.
Literature helps me to speak about humanity, but especially to join up with it.
Mon personnage n'a pas de nationalité.
My character has no citizenship.
J'ai fait un roman, pas un passeport.
I wrote a novel, not a passport.
Et si je suis ici aujourd'hui,
And if I am here today,
c'est parce qu'il y a des lecteurs qui ont lu ce roman
it's because there are readers who read this novel
comme celui d'une condition humaine.
as a novel about a human condition.
C'est tout l'art du roman.
That's the entire art about a
C'est
novel,
qu'il fait oublier la nationalité
is that it helps one forget
pour rappeler la
citizenship,
condition.
to bring back to recall the condition, the human condition.
Est-ce qu'on peut parler d'Algérie?
Can one talk about Algeria?
Oui et non.
Yes and no.
L'Algérie est invisible, elle n'existe pas.
Algeria is invisible, it doesn't exist.
Il s'agit surtout d'un homme qui défend sa liberté dans un pays où on lui impose un Dieu.
It's especially about a man who is defending his freedom in a country where a god is being imposed on him.
C'est pour ça que ça peut vous intéresser.
And that's why it can interest you.
Sinon, l'Algérie n'est pas intéressante,
Otherwise,
Beaucoup.
Algeria is not interesting,
malheureusement.
unfortunately.
Just to follow up on that, so I guess in thinking about that novel, and also for Francine, in thinking about sort of the historical character, or the sort of your fictional version of her, were you? I mean, sort of reading both of them, a part of me felt like there was this act of trying to create a character who had sort of been, to some degree, somewhat forgotten. There's a wonderful line about when the character's talking about Lou saying they wanted to breathe life into the sort of seemingly forgotten character, and with Algeria, I can see definitely not the invisibility of it, but were you at all sort of conscious that, to some degree, by writing about it, you do render it more visible? That even if it's not limited to the context of Algeria, that there's still an attempt to kind of grant it a visibility and a complexity that we can then engage in, even in naming the character repeatedly Moussa, so that we can't actually forget his name. It seems to me that visibility seems to be part of the attempt, and maybe not.
Je pense que les villes sont des matrices d'images,
I believe cities are matrices for imagery,
comme les pays.
just as countries are.
Il y a des villes et des pays qui ont plus d'images que d'autres,
You have cities and countries that have more imagery than others,
et d'autres non.
and others not so.
Et donc la littérature participe à ce capital d'images.
So a literature is part of this capital of imagery.
Est-ce qu'on peut dire, après Marquez, que c'est son pays qui existe le plus, ou c'est Macondo, le village?
Can you say after Marquez that his country is the one that exists the more, or is it Macondo, his village,
Dans 100 ans de solitude?
in 100 Years of
Je
Solitude?
crois que le village existe plus que le pays.
I do believe in that case the village exists more than the country.
On peut faire le test.
You can do a test now.
C'est vrai que la littérature participe à rendre visible un pays,
And it's true that literature takes part in helping a country become visible, being more
Mais-
visible,
un pays n'est qu'un prétexte
but a country in the end is just a pretext
pour un texte.
for a text.
Well, I mean, you are. I mean, one of the joys of writing is that you are making the invisible visible, and also in the case of this last novel, I felt as if I were being able to. I mean, to animate the dead. Really, you just bring people back and give them voices that they didn't have, and give them a kind of. Make people pay attention in a way that they weren't during their actual lifetimes.
And even in that animation, there's a lot of doubt, right, about how honest those biographies are going to be. I mean, we actually know that there's a lot of problems that the animation. I'm curious about how much you want that idea of being able to animate or resurrect even these forgotten narratives to make sure that they lack a kind of authenticity or an authority, like a singular authority. You seem to want to make sure that the animation comes with a complication.
Oh yeah, and I mean, part of what I enjoyed about the writing, and part of what still makes me happy, was the way in which I could just use multiple layers of irony, really, to deal with it. I mean, writing about a character who just seemed to me almost impossible to understand, and it was a huge challenge. So the only way I was able to do it was to write a sort of bogus biography of the character written by a woman who was incapable of understanding the character. So in other words, my problems with the character became my biographer's problems, and I could just pass them along, which is, again, the joy of fiction. I mean, I could never have done that in a biography, a real biography or an essay, but with fiction, it's open that way.
Ce qui est amusant quand on écrit des fictions,
What's fun when you're writing fiction,
c'est une petite recette
it's a tiny recipe,
que beaucoup d'écrivains connaissent.
which many writers are familiar with.
Quand une fiction parle d'une autre fiction,
When a fiction talks about another fiction,
les deux deviennent réels.
both become real.
C'est assez fascinant.
It's quite fascinating.
Prenez un personnage d'un roman.
If you take a character from a
Si
novel,
vous en parlez dans un deuxième roman,
if you talk about him in another
les deux
novel,
deviennent vrais.
both become real.
Les deux deviennent réels.
Both.
Et c'est une technique de narration aussi,
It's a
d'écriture.
narrative technique also,
Mais pas seulement.
but not only.
Deux livres, quand ils s'additionnent, deviennent vrais.
Two books, when you sum them up, become real.
C'est magique.
It's magical.
And it's one of the interesting things that connects both of these works is that in Francine's novel, there are all these fictional texts that keep coming up. They're extracts from biographies from somebody's own work, and you can see these sort of the intercontextual narratives, right? These books are actually talking not only to other works of literature, but they're talking inside of themselves to other works of literature. In Kamel's novel, there's a book called The Other, which is a wonderful sort of presence that comes in at the very end. And you can see how these narratives are also so much about, or I guess I'm curious how much they are also about the very act of creating fiction, right? The sort of the process and role that narrative plays in our culture and our society.
Pas uniquement de création, c'est
Not
tout à
only
la
about-
fois comment créer et qu'est-ce qu'on ne peut pas créer.
Not only about creativity, it's also about creating, but also about what one cannot create.
Dans le livre que j'ai écrit,
So in this book I wrote,
le second livre s'appelle L'autre,
the second book is called The Other,
mais c'est une correction.
but it's a correction.
Parce que dans la version originale du roman,
Because in the original version of the novel,
ça s'appelait L'étranger.
it was called The Stranger.
Mais la famille de Camus a refusé.
But Camus' family refused.
Donc, où est la limite entre la fiction et la famille de Camus?
So where is the limit between fiction and Camus' family?
Est-ce que la littérature est une fiction?
Is literature a fiction?
C'est ce qu'il faut dire à la famille de Camus.
And that's what one should say to Camus' family.
Ce que je veux dire, c'est que l'histoire pèse dans la littérature,
What I mean is that history bears its weight on
du
over
moins
literature,
dans la géographie où je vis.
at least in the geography in which I live.
Quand j'ai écrit ce roman,
When I wrote this novel,
il y avait l'enjeu de la fiction,
there was the stakes, what was
Mais
at stake with the
il y
fiction,
avait le poids de l'histoire.
but there was also the weight of history.
Est-ce que le roman allait être lu de la même manière en Algérie et en France?
Was the novel going to be read the same way in Algeria as in France?
Deux pays malades de l'histoire.
Two countries that are sick from history.
Est-ce qu'il va être lu de la même manière aux États-Unis et au Vietnam?
Is it going to be read the same way in the United States or Vietnam?
Est-ce qu'on va comprendre les métaphores de la même manière?
Are the metaphors going to be understood in the same way?
Est-ce que les propriétaires de l'étranger vont accepter?
Are the owners of The Stranger going to accept
La
it?
limite entre fiction et littérature s'est posée pour moi autrement.
The limit between fiction and literature presented itself differently for me
En termes de fiction,
in terms of fiction
mais en termes de droit.
and also in terms of rights,
Parce que l'histoire nous emprisonne.
because history imprisons us.
Can I ask Kamel what you wound up thinking about The Stranger?
C'est un livre ennuyeux au début.
It's a boring book at the beginning.
J'ai lu L'étranger comme tout le monde,
I read The Stranger like everyone else
en enjambant l'arabe.
by stepping over the Arab.
C'est-à-dire que c'est ça la magie, j'ai pris le point de vue du meurtrier.
Meaning that's what's so magical, is that I adopted the point of view of the murderer.
La littérature suspend bien et mal.
The literature kind of suspends good and bad, good
J'étais
and
fasciné
evil.
par son style,
I was fascinated by his style,
mais c'était ennuyeux.
but it was boring.
C'est ce qui fait toute la magie de ce roman,
And that's what's so magical about this
qui peut
novel,
être lu par quelqu'un de très intelligent,
that it can be read by someone who's very intelligent.
qui peut être lu par George Bush. aussi,
It could be read by George Bush.
Non, ce que je veux dire en
What-
plaisantant,
What I mean, jokingly,
c'est que c'est un roman qui est très fascinant.
is that it's a novel that's really
Il
fascinating,
ne donne pas du plaisir,
but it doesn't give you pleasure,
mais il provoque une obsession.
but it kind of triggers an obsession.
No, I ask because I just reread it when I read your novel, and I read it again, and it was a completely different novel than I read when I read it in high school. When I was, I have to say, wildly bored by it in high school, and also when I read it in high school, we were taught it as an example of existentialism, and now. And we had no idea what that was. I still have no idea what that was. I mean, if someone put a gun to my head and said, describe existentialism in a few sentences. But this time around, it seemed a completely different novel to me. I mean, it seemed to me that Camus was very aware that the man who was murdered didn't have a name, was not considered to be a human being, that this wasn't an accident, that he hadn't completely embraced the values of the dominant culture, that underneath was some sense of how complicated this was.
Moi, ce qui m'a fasciné dans l'étranger, c'est une loi.
What really fascinated me in The Stranger is a law.
On tue plus facilement quelqu'un qui n'a pas de nom.
One kills more easily someone that does not have a name.
C'est tout le paradoxe de l'homme blanc.
It's the entire paradox about the white man.
Quand il va dans des pays étrangers,
When they go to foreign countries,
il donne des noms aux montagnes,
they give names to mountains,
aux insectes,
to insects,
aux lacs,
to lakes,
aux arbres.
to trees.
Mais vendredi s'appelle vendredi.
But Friday is Friday. His
Dans
name is
Robinson
Friday.
Crusoe.
In Robinson Crusoe.
Et je pense que lorsqu'on tue le nom, on
And
peut
I
tuer l'homme.
think that once you kill a name, you can kill the man.
Je crois que pour moi, l'étranger,
For me, The Stranger
c'est une Robinsonade tragique.
is a tragic
Robinsonade.
Robinson Crusoe.
Il existe 4 catégories de Robinsonade.
For me, there are 4 categories of Robinsonade.
Abel tue Cain,
Abel kills Cain
il l'enterre.
and buries him.
Robinson convertit vendredi.
Robinson Crusoe converts Friday,
Meursault tue l'arabe.
and Meusault kills the Arab.
Et moi, je vous parle.
And I'm talking to you.
Trying to say, I'm worried about where that would go. I was just sort of worried slightly about trying to figure out what the sort of relationship between historical works of fiction and the sort of contemporary world that we live in. But it was hard not to obviously want to do that with both of these works. Partly in Francine's novel, there's a great moment where the characters are talking about the sort of hostility, especially in France, to these new people who keep arriving, all these immigrants who keep washing up in France in the years leading up to World War II. And of course, in Camel's work, the sort of problems of the rise of a kind of theocratic state and the power of religion sort of creeping its way into people's very private lives. Watching that sort of through these historical characters, I was like, how much is that a sort of a deliberate dialogue, or is it just that, what happens whenever you tell any story, you find the links between past and present, or are you consciously trying to use the past, I think, to bring that present state into brighter light?
Well, I mean, one of the great things about literature, it seems so obvious that it seems like it's hardly worth mentioning, is the way it reminds you of how certain things haven't changed, or how certain things keep recurring, certain patterns of behavior, certain patterns of history, certain patterns of government, of politics, of love, of hate, and so forth. So, it's one of the reasons to go back and read a 19th century novel or an 18th century novel or Don Quixote, where you recognize things that seem familiar to you from your own life and yet seem to have happened 100, 200, 300 years ago. So yeah.
La question?
I guess, I agree with you. Like, it does always happen, but how deliberate, I guess, is what I'm curious about, right? Because we can always know that if you put two narratives side by side, you're going to be able to see kind of a reflection inside of themselves, a past or a present. But I think maybe also I'm curious if it is in some sense more conscious than that. Like you sort of know when you write a line about the sort of rejection of immigrants and the sort of people sitting, even though that's more, it's not even that contemporary. Is it deliberate to try to think about how that history is in conversation with where we are right now? Not just not just a question of like parallel accidents that happen when narratives are placed side by side, but a kind of conscious attempt as a writer to use certain moments in our present state and bring them into that past.
Vous savez, je viens d'un pays où l'histoire pèse lourdement.
You know, I come from a country where history has a very heavy weight.
On appelle ça les périodes post-coloniales.
And it is often referred to as post-colonial eras.
Tout l'exercice, c'est de se libérer du passé.
And what is striving for is to kind of liberate oneself from the past.
Et une manière de se libérer du passé, c'est de le réécrire.
And one of the ways of liberating oneself from the past is to write it.
Enfin, c'est ce que moi j'ai trouvé comme méthode.
At least that's the method that I found.
On peut trouver autre chose aussi.
And someone could come up with something else.
La littérature est tout à la fois le lieu où l'histoire rejaillit, mais où l'histoire est niée.
Literature is the place where history can come forth, but also where history is denied.
Parce que sinon, on aurait écrit des essais.
Because otherwise we would have written essays.
C'est parce que je veux oublier l'histoire que je raconte une histoire.
It's because I want to forget history that I am telling a story.
C'est comme ça que je vois les choses.
That's how I see things.
J'ai grandi dans un pays où on me disait que tout ce qui est passé est noble.
I grew up in a country where I was always told that everything that's from the past is noble.
Et ce qui fait que le présent est dégradé.
Which means that the present is degraded.
Donc, je suis obligé d'écrire.
So I am forced to write.
Pour pouvoir mettre de la distance entre moi et ce passé, justement.
To kind of create distance between myself and that past.
C'est illusoire.
It's kind of
On
illusory.
n'échappe pas à l'histoire.
You cannot escape history.
Mais on peut au moins dire ce qu'on en pense.
But you can at least say what you have to say about it.
C'est différent.
It's different.
Je pense qu'aux États-Unis, l'histoire ne pèse pas de la même manière.
I believe that here in the United States, history doesn't have the same weight.
Il n'y a pas ici chez vous une religion de la nostalgie.
Here you don't have this religion of nostalgia.
Nous sommes dans le monde arabe une vieille famille qui est fauchée, mais qui était à l'époque célèbre, qui avait de l'argent.
We're in the Arab world, we're this broke family, but that once used to be famous and had money.
Donc l'histoire pèse.
So history has a weight.
On n'écrit pas de la même manière.
You don't write the same way.
Et on ne combat pas les mêmes dieux.
And then you don't fight the same gods.
En même temps, je ne veux pas dire que la littérature, c'est quelque chose de très compliqué.
But that being said, I don't want to say that literature is something that's very complicated.
Personnellement, j'ai écrit un roman, pas un essai.
Personally, I wrote a novel, not an essay.
Et je ne veux pas faire peur aux gens qui vont l'acheter.
And I don't want to scare people who are going to stay here with us.
Which is, 'cause there's also, there's a lot of sort of joy actually and pleasure in Francine's novel. What you can sort of see is the sort of incredible cast of characters, the sort of a decadent, almost sort of sometimes if you know Paris today, almost sort of tragic that we can't kind of imagine such a lively sort of place compared to the more affluent reality that I think we sort of live in nowadays. But I'm curious, when in that same vein of going back into sort of history, when you were sort of thinking about this period in Paris, the 1920s and 30s, how sort of easily romantic that sort of period can sometimes be, especially from the outside, and whether that sort of made you, how much of that serves as an invitation as a novelist to kind of like step into that romanticism, and how much it sort of made you think like you need to be afraid or a bit worried, right, to not let that romanticism, or when you're writing out of that type of, when you know you're writing out of this period that's easily a nostalgic place, right, to easily sort of look back on the sort of moment of Paris just before World War II and think of it in sort of a decadent glory.
Well, part of the reason I went so far back in history, I mean, my story really, it seemed to me, was going to start just before the Nazi occupation. And then, because things had gotten so dark, things got so dark so quickly, I thought, well, I'm going to have to go further back to make people understand how bright it was before it got dark. But I remember at some point I was reading a history of France in the 30s, and there was a passage from the history book I was reading, and it was it was a description of the things people were worried about and complaining about. And it was too much immigration, too much taxes, decline in the educational system. People weren't able to give their kids the future that they wanted in life. They wanted, and I called up a friend of mine and I just read her that passage from the book, and she said, is this now? And I said, no, it's Paris in the 30s. So, you know, in a way it was depressing. And at the same time it was sort of encouraging to know that I wasn't, you know, it wasn't such an effort of an imagination because what I was writing about was then, and it was now at the same time.
And something similar with Kamel, like I'm curious how much these sort of things sort of haunt over you. You in an interview with the New Yorker, you talked about wanting to write through Camus. And I was thinking of that perhaps almost in a similar vein of sort of Francine taking on what seems, it's an easily sort of nostalgic or romanticized period in Paris history, and wanting to kind of write both into that and then also through it. Like that very expression of wanting to write, to know that you're taking on the stranger, but wanting to make sure that you're not just rewriting the stranger, but actually doing something different, that idea of writing through it.
J'ai pour habitude de répondre aux journalistes.
My habit is to answer journalists.
C'est dans toute cette affaire, on est 4.
In this whole story, there are 4 of us.
Meusault, Haroun, mon personnage,
Haroun, the character,
Camus, moi.
and myself.
Et les 3 sont morts.
3 of them are dead.
Je suis vivant.
And I am alive.
Et je pense que j'ai une obligation à trouver des réponses.
And I believe I have an obligation to come up with answers.
Je parle de cette manière pour séduire.
I'm talking this way to be seductive.
Mais en même temps, c'est très vrai.
But at the same time, it's very real.
Je ne suis pas un Camusien.
I'm not a Camusian writer.
Camus, c'est un prétexte pour moi.
Camus is a pretext for me.
Ce qui m'importe, c'est de donner du sens à ce que je fais.
What's important to me is to give meaning to what I do.
Parce que la question de la mort m'est encore posée.
Because the issue of death is still confronting me.
La littérature, pour moi, participe tout à la fois
For me, literature
de l'entreprise de séduction,
is a form of seduction,
mais de l'entreprise intime de se donner du sens.
but also deals with this much more intimate level of giving sense, meaning to oneself.
Peut-être que j'exagère,
Maybe I'm exaggerating,
mais on a tous besoin de ça aussi.
but we all need that.
Donc, j'ai pris le prétexte de l'étranger
So I took the pretext of the stranger,
parce que peut-être c'est une manière de vous séduire,
because maybe it's a way of seducing you.
mais j'ai parlé de ce qui m'importe.
But I wrote about what was important to me.
Comment être libre?
How to be free.
Qu'est-ce que je dois faire de Dieu?
What should I do with God?
Qu'est-ce que être algérien aussi maintenant?
What does it mean to be Algerian nowadays?
Qu'est-ce que je dois faire face à la femme?
What should I do faced with a woman?
Donc c'est de grandes questions.
So these are big issues.
Et on peut écrire plusieurs romans sur ces questions.
And you could write several novels about all of these issues.
Et c'est ce qui m'a poussé d'abord à écrire ce roman.
And that's what really pushed me to write this novel
Mais
to
il faut
begin
être
with.
honnête aussi. Il faut être honnête.
But you also have to be honest.
Quand on écrit un roman, je
Oui.
pense que on écrit d'abord un roman.
I think that when you write a novel, you first write a novel,
Et après, on trouve du sens avec les gens.
and then afterwards you find meaning through the people.
Je pense qu'on est plus intelligent après le roman que pendant.
I think when you're smarter after the novel than during writing it.
Parce que si on réfléchit trop,
Because if you give it too much thought, if you're thinking too much,
l'idée devient précise,
the notions, the ideas become precise,
mais la métaphore devient banale.
but the metaphor becomes commonplace.
Ça ne fait pas de bons romans, de
And
réfléchir.
that doesn't create, thinking doesn't create a good novel.
C'est malheureux, mais c'est comme ça.
It's unfortunate, but that's the way it is.
Yeah, which I think works. There's something that I kept thinking with both books is that there's a kind of line of inquiry that sort of seems to follow both books. It's trying, in some cases, to figure out who are these characters at the center of them, because neither character is actually able to speak. Musa can't speak, Lou can't speak. They never actually get a chance to rise fully from the dead and actually make their voices heard in the books. And so instead there are these, both characters sort of like, they're the holes that sort of sit at the center of the narrative. And I kept thinking like that idea of the novel and the attempt to sort of write about these characters as partly this just investigation, right? There's something sort of detective-like about trying to cobble together these characters because they can't do the work themselves.
Oh, I'm so happy to hear you say that, you know.
I mean,
I mean, you know, in some way, I guess, well, you can't say every novel, but the novels that I most love and the novels that I try and write, they are kind of mysteries that can't be solved. They just can't be solved. I mean, they're about something mysterious that has no solution. So in this case, because it was someone who had done something quite evil, I mean, and I kept saying, you know, they don't call evil a mystery for nothing. It is a mystery. And I had no intention ever of figuring out why she did what she did, why she became a torturer for the Gestapo, why she became a traitor and a spy. And later, after the book came out, some people said, well, it was so unsatisfactory because we didn't figure out the reasons behind this. But that was never my intention, for people to figure out the reasons. My intention was to say these reasons can't be figured out. They are mysterious.
Dans mon cas, c'est différent.
In my case, it's a bit different.
J'ai été tenté d'écrire un roman policier.
At first, I was tempted to write a police novel,
Mais il y avait un paradoxe.
but there was a paradox.
Dans le cas de l'étranger,
In the case of The Stranger,
nous avons le meurtrier,
you have the murderer,
les aveux du meurtrier,
his testimony,
mais on n'a pas de cadavre.
but there's no body, there's no cadaver.
C'est le paradoxe.
And that's the paradox.
Parce que dans le roman policier, c'est le contraire.
Because in a police novel, it's the complete opposite.
On a le cadavre, mais on n'a pas le coupable.
You have the body, but you don't have the guilty person.
C'était ce qui m'avait fasciné.
And that's what fascinated me.
C'est un homme qui vous dit que j'ai tué,
Here you have a man who says, I killed,
mais il n'y a aucune trace du cadavre.
but there's no trace of the body.
J'ai voulu que mon roman soit ce cadavre.
And I wanted my novel to be that body.
Je voulais que le corps du mort soit ce que lit le lecteur.
I wanted the body of the dead man to be what the reader would be reading.
Le texte est la preuve du meurtre.
The text is the proof of the murder.
C'est quelque chose de fascinant quand la littérature devient une preuve.
And it's something truly fascinating when literature becomes a proof.
On est dans un jeu de corps.
You're kind of playing in this game of bodies.
Au fur et à mesure que j'écris, je prouve.
As I write, I'm proving things more and more.
C'est pour ça que j'ai été tenté par les codes du roman policier,
So that's why at first I was really tempted by the codes of the police novel,
en inversant.
by flipping them.
Francine made an interesting point about sometimes maybe the frustration or reluctance readers have to texts that sort of defy that easy response, right? With Lou, we get to see through Suzanne how violent she actually becomes, but that evolution, that process happens without, you can't sort of necessarily draw a clear line and say that's the moment she suddenly becomes a torturer, that's the moment she moves, although you can see how she's manipulated to get into that point. But I guess like that frustration of your reader sometimes to maybe to want to have a certain clarity, and for both of you, how conscious of you are that when you're sort of writing the text that you're not providing a response that might satisfy the reader, but you're also perhaps giving them a different sort of pleasure, right? You're offering them something that's harder to come to terms with, but lingers maybe a little bit longer in the mind. We're sort of haunted by both of these characters. I think by the time you get to the very end, they linger in powerful ways that are, yeah.
Comment peut-on vendre un roman si on n'entretient pas la frustration?
How can you sell a novel if you don't make sure frustration lingers?
Donc, ça fait partie du métier aussi, je crois.
That's part of the trade, I think.
J'ai pas l'impression que ma réponse est intelligente.
I really don't feel my answer is intelligent in any way.
Et c'est-à-dire que quand on écrit, je pense qu'on construit aussi
I think that when you're writing, you're also constructing
avec le lecteur,
with the reader,
sans y penser aussi.
and also without thinking about it.
Donc, pour moi, personnellement, je prends des codes connus.
So as far as I'm concerned, I work with known codes.
Le roman initiatique,
The initiatic novel,
le roman policier, par exemple,
the police novel,
le conte dans le monde arabe,
the tale in the Arab tradition,
qui tourne en rond
which kind of spins on itself,
et qui est bâti sur le monologue.
and which is also based on a monologue.
et ce qui m'aide à construire quelque chose de séduisant.
when
Enfin,
that all helps me to construct something that's seductive,
où je pense être séduisant pour le lecteur.
or in which I feel that I'm seductive for the reader.
Dans le patrimoine du monde arabe ou mondial,
So in the cultural legacy of the Arab world or the world culture,
il y a ce que vous connaissez tous, les 1001 nuits.
you have the 1001 Nights.
Et dedans, il y a une clause d'écriture qui est sublime.
And in it you have this clause of writing which is absolutely sublime.
Je raconte une histoire
I am telling a story
pour que le roi ne me coupe pas la tête.
so that the king does not behead me.
C'est magnifique comme métaphore.
That's a magnificent metaphor.
C'est-à-dire que l'enjeu est celui de la vie et de la mort
Meaning that the stake is about life and death
par le jeu de l'intérêt du lecteur.
through the game of how interested the reader
À mes
is.
yeux, on n'a jamais résumé l'enjeu de l'écriture d'une manière aussi puissante.
In my eyes, no one ever summarized what is at stake with writing in such a powerful way.
J'ai toujours ça en tête quand j'écris.
And that's always in my mind when I'm writing.
Il faut que l'on pousse le lecteur
You really need to push the reader
à cette limite.
to that limit.
Mon personnage dit que Camus écrit bien parce que
My character says that Camus wrote well because
il donne l'impression d'écrire comme si c'était les derniers mots de sa vie.
he writes giving the impression as if he's writing that he's expressing the last words of his life.
Ce qui fait la beauté du style d'Albert Camus.
And that's what's so beautiful about Camus' writing style.
Well, I mean, I think that one of the things that fiction can do, or literature can do, is to help people accept ambiguity or become more comfortable with ambiguity. I mean, I think that there's some sort of hunger in the culture more and more to say things are one thing or the other, people are this or that, or this is their motivation. And I often hear myself telling my students, you know, the reader is not the psychotherapist of the character. I mean, it's not the reader's job or to figure out why somebody did something in that simple way. I mean, part of the job, I think, of the novelist, which is, you know, has to do with observing what goes on around us or looking at people, is to realize and to portray the fact that people are very, very complicated, that they have mixed motives, that they're not one thing or the other. And in any case where you can do that, I think it's very useful and important because there's so much pressure, I think, and so many people read in a way to say it has to be this or that.
I think now is when we get to open it up to the audience. So I do hope that there'll be somebody quickly. There are fast hands going up. We'll go here first, please. Can you just hold the mic?
Est-ce que d'une certaine manière, consciemment ou inconsciemment, vous vous situez dans une tradition littéraire algérienne, disons de Mouloud Faraoun à Kateb Yassine, à Djebar? Est-ce que écrire en français est pour vous une sorte de continuation de cette tradition?
This question was, do you situate yourself in an Algerian literary tradition, and does the fact that you write in French, is that part of that tradition?
La magie de la littérature,
So what is magical about literature
c'est qu'elle vous permet de choisir vos ancêtres.
is that it enables you to choose your own ancestors.
Et oui, d'accord, je suis d'accord.
Yes, I agree.
Est-ce que je m'inscris dans une tradition? Très possible.
Am I part of a tradition? Very possibly so.
Je suis né dans un pays où le français a un statut.
I was born in a country where the French language has a certain status,
Un statut ambigu.
an ambiguous status.
C'est une belle langue,
It's a beautiful language,
mais la langue d'un violeur.
but the language of a rapist.
Est-ce que je peux en faire un métaphore ou un souvenir?
Can I turn it into a metaphor or a memory?
Est-ce que je dois en faire un silence ou une appropriation?
Should I turn it into a silence or an appropriation?
Est-ce que ça m'appartient?
Does it belong to me?
Oui,
Yes,
ça m'appartient.
it does belong to me.
Je m'inscris dans cette tradition qui fait de la langue
I kind of
un butin.
position myself in the tradition that turns language into a spoil.
Dans la tradition de la littérature algérienne,
So as far as the tradition of Algerian literature,
la langue est un personnage.
language is a character.
Parce que c'est un personnage dans notre histoire.
because it's a character in our history.
On me pose souvent cette question, pourquoi j'écris en français?
I am often asked that question, why do you write in French?
Et quand je réponds sincèrement, personne n'est convaincu.
And when I answer honestly, no one is
Parce
convinced.
que je réponds toujours parce que j'en ai envie.
Because I always answer because I want to.
Et c'est difficile de convaincre les gens par son désir.
And it's difficult to convince people with your desire.
Donc, il y a une tradition de la littérature algérienne.
So there is a tradition of Algerian
Elle est
literature.
riche.
It's rich.
J'y choisis mes ancêtres.
I pick my own ancestors in it,
Et je continue ce que j'ai envie de continuer.
and I continue doing what I want to do.
Mais je ne suis pas dans un rapport fétichiste vis-à-vis de la langue.
But I don't have this fetishistic relationship vis-à-vis of language.
La langue française pour moi est un accident sublime.
For me, the French language is a sublime accident.
Un jour, mon fils m'a posé la question pourquoi il faut apprendre plusieurs langues.
Once my son asked me this question, why do we have to learn different
Vous
languages?
savez, aux enfants, on ne peut pas mentir.
You know, you really can't lie to
Et
children.
je lui dis,
And I said to him,
de la manière la plus simple
in
possible,
the simplest possible way,
qu'une maison avec plusieurs fenêtres est mieux éclairée qu'une maison avec une fenêtre.
that a house with several windows has better light than a house with a single window.
Donc, j'écris en français parce que j'en ai envie.
So I write in French because I want to.
Je m'inscris dans une tradition algérienne
I position myself as part of an Algerian tradition.
et j'essaie de continuer quelque chose qui m'est personnel.
And I'm also trying to pursue something that is personal to me.
Et quand j'écris,
And when I write,
paradoxalement,
paradoxically,
j'essaie de faire oublier la langue
I try to make people forget language,
parce que c'est le but d'un bon écrivain.
because that's the goal of any good
C'est de
writer.
faire oublier la langue et le livre
It's to make people forget both the language and the book,
et le prix du livre.
and also the price of the book.
So I have a question for Kamel Daoud. I was wondering, especially in light of your comments about how you're writing about the human condition and not Algeria, how you would respond to certain of your critics, particularly in France, who are saying that you're politicizing a book that is about, issues that are more metaphysical. What would you say to that?
L'Algérie et la France ont un rapport particulier.
French and Algeria have a singular relationship.
Ils sont marqués par une histoire.
They're both history. They're both impacted by the same history.
Et quand il y a trop d'histoire,
And when there's too much history,
la fiction n'est pas admise.
fiction is not admitted.
On soupçonne la fiction d'être une manière indirecte de raconter
You
l'histoire.
start suspecting fiction of being an indirect way of telling history.
Dans les régimes totalitaires,
When you're dealing with totalitarian regimes,
la fiction est douteuse.
fiction is suspicious.
On croit que c'est un sous-entendu.
People believe it's an understatement.
Un jour, j'avais répondu à la même question en France.
So once I answered that same question in France,
J'ai dit que je rêve du lecteur japonais ou américain ou sud-africain.
I said I was dreaming about having a Japanese, a South African, or some other reader.
Parce que le lecteur français et algérien sont des lecteurs malades.
Because French and Algerian readers are sick readers, they're
Ils
ill.
n'échappent pas à l'histoire.
They're unable to escape history.
Tout le monde lit Albert Camus comme un grand penseur du XXe siècle,
Everyone reads Camus as a great thinker of the 20th century,
sauf beaucoup d'Algériens et beaucoup de Français.
except many Algerians and many French people.
Parce que on soupçonne Camus
Because Camus is suspected
d'avoir écrit de faux romans,
of having written false
de fausses
novels,
pièces de théâtre,
false plays,
une fausse philosophie
a false philosophy,
qui se réduit à un message politique.
which is kind of reduced to a political message.
Alors que Camus est un grand interrogateur du XXe siècle.
Whereas Camus is in fact a great questioner of the 20th century.
Camus a parlé de la condition humaine,
Camus wrote about the human condition,
pas de deux ou d'une nationalité.
not about a citizenship.
Les gens se souviennent d'un roman, pas d'un discours.
People remember a novel, not a speech.
C'est ce qui fait la magie de la littérature.
And that's what's magical about literature.
Si le lecteur français ou algérien croit que j'ai politisé ce roman,
If an Algerian or French reader believes that I politicized that novel,
il faut les excuser.
you have to excuse them.
Monsieur Daoud, l'idée d'identifier Camus et Meursault, quand vous est-elle venue? Et est-ce qu'elle implique aussi l'inverse, c'est-à-dire que Kamel, c'est aussi Haroun?
When did you come up with the idea of identifying Camus and Meursault, and taking that further, are you and Haroun also identified?
C'est la vieille question.
That's an old question.
Est-ce qu'on est Frankenstein ou pas?
Are we Frankenstein or not?
On écrit à partir de sa personne, je pense.
You're right, stemming from your own person, I believe.
Mais votre question est très judicieuse.
But your question is very clever.
Parce que j'ai confondu volontairement Meursault et Camus.
Because I deliberately fused Meursault and Camus.
C'est ce qui m'a posé des problèmes avec la famille de Camus.
And that's what triggered all sorts of problems with Camus' family.
Des problèmes juridiques.
Legal issues.
Alors pourquoi je l'ai fait?
So why did I do that?
Parce qu'en Algérie, les gens reprochent à Meursault ce qu'ils reprochent à Camus.
Because in Algeria, people are angry, kind of confuse what was are critical towards Camus with are critical in the same way towards Meursault and towards Camus.
Meursault est accusé d'avoir tué un arabe.
Meursault is accused of having killed an Arab.
Et Camus de ne pas avoir fait la guerre de libération.
And Camus is accused of not fighting in the liberation war.
En Algérie comme en France.
In Algeria and in the same case as in
Camus
France.
est une personne, mais aussi un personnage.
Camus is both a person and a character.
On a des avis sur Camus sans avoir lu Camus.
People have opinions about Camus without having ever read him.
Je voulais dénoncer ça.
And I really wanted to challenge that.
J'ai créé un personnage qui s'appelle Albert Meursault.
I created a character whose name is Albert Meursault.
Qui, les deux, ont soit commis un meurtre, soit ont refusé de le commettre.
Both either committed a murder or either refused to commit a murder.
Maintenant, entre moi et Haroun,
So now between me and Haroun,
j'espère vieillir mieux.
I do hope I will age better.
On a l'impression, quand on lit votre livre, que vous voyez Camus comme le fils d'un colon et que vous l'accusez de colonialisme.
One has a feeling reading your book that you consider Camus as the son of a colonizer and you accuse him of being a colonizer. Yeah.
Je crois que vous me confondez avec mon personnage.
I think you're confusing me with my character.
Le roman se divise en deux.
The novel can kind of be separated in two.
Une partie où Haroun accuse Camus et Meursault de meurtre.
So you have one part where Haroun is accusing Camus and Meursault of
Et donc
murder.
il est très critique envers eux.
And so he's extremely critical towards them.
Une deuxième partie où il accuse le présent.
And another part where he is accusing the present.
Il accuse tous les siens.
He is accusing all the ones that are close to him.
Et ce n'est pas une accusation contre Camus de colonialisme.
And it's not an accusation of colonialism towards Camus.
C'est un démantèlement de cette accusation.
It's an unstructuring of that accusation.
C'est parce que je parle de quelque chose, c'est pour mieux la démanteler.
When I speak about something, it's to better unravel it.
Je ne voulais pas que ça reste dans le non-dit.
I didn't want this to remain in the zone of unspokenness.
Disons les choses.
Let's speak about things.
Et là, on peut en discuter.
And here we can talk about them.
Et mon personnage commence par une colère contre Camus.
And my character begins being very angry towards Camus.
Il finit par une colère contre lui-même.
And ends up being angry towards himself.
Un jour, pour revenir à cette question,
And to go back to that previous question,
j'ai fait un entretien radio avec un philosophe français,
one day I did a radio interview with a French philosopher,
Finkielkraut.
Alain Finkielkraut.
Et il avait invité un pied noir. Un pied noir, c'est quelqu'un, enfin il faut expliquer, qui était en Algérie.
And he had invited a pied noir who had been in Algeria.
Et c'était extraordinaire.
And it was incredible.
Parce qu'il me disait que la première partie du roman est moyenne,
because he was telling me that the first part of the novel was so-so,
c'est-à-dire là où le personnage critique Camus.
meaning the part where the character is criticizing Camus,
Mais la deuxième était magnifique.
but that the second part was magnificent.
On me disait le contraire en Algérie.
And in Algeria, people were telling me the complete opposite.
Je suis très content.
So I'm very happy.
Sérieusement.
We have one last question. Is that right?
Hello, and this question is for anyone on the stage. As I was reading the Meusault investigation, I was also reading Ta-Nehisi Coates' Between the World and Me, and I was struck by how much of what Mr. Daoud wrote could also apply to race relations in the United States, based on my reading of Mr. Coates. And I was wondering if anyone on the stage would just comment on the pertinence of the Meusault investigation to race in the United States.
Well, I don't even know what to say. I mean, what do I want to say? It's an ongoing problem, obviously. It's something that hasn't been solved by a long shot. It's endlessly horrifying. And Ta-Nehisi Coates and Kamel's novel and everything we read in the newspaper every day is just a testament to how this hasn't been solved, either here in this country or in France or in Europe. I mean, the current waves of immigration in Europe and the refugee crisis is endless testament to how this keeps on going. So, you know, we can write about it forever and ever and ever, but the hopes of our solving it seem dim, let me say.
Je crois qu'un des mythes qui m'ont le plus fasciné dans ma vie,
I think one of the myths that was most fascinating to me in my life
c'est Robinson.
is Robinson Crusoe,
C'est la question de l'autre.
is the issue of the other.
La peau de l'autre est un miroir.
The skin of the other is a mirror.
On y voit ses propres préjugés.
You can see your own prejudices in it.
S'il est noir, c'est parce que j'y projette ce que je veux refouler.
And if that mirror is black, is because I'm projecting into it what I want to
S'il est,
get rid of.
s'il est invisible, parce que je veux le nier.
If it's invisible, it's because I want to deny it.
S'il est jaune, c'est parce que je veux le rejeter.
If it's yellow, it's because I want to reject it.
Je crois que la question de l'autre est la question essentielle.
I think that the issue of the other is an essential issue.
C'est ce qui nous différencie des dieux.
It's what differentiates us from the gods.
C'est que nous devons vivre avec l'autre.
Is that we need to live with the other.
Même un Dieu n'a pas cette responsabilité.
Even a God doesn't have such a responsibility.
La question est qu'est-ce que je dois faire avec l'autre?
The issue is what must I do with this
Est-ce
other?
que je dois le tuer et l'enterrer?
Must I kill it and kill him and bury
Est-ce que je
him?
dois le nier?
Must I deny
Est-ce
him?
que je dois
Negate him?
l'aimer?
Must I love him?
Haroun dit que l'autre est ma frontière.
Harun says that the other is his border.
Quand je le tue, je suis affreusement libre.
When I kill him, I am horribly free.
Je crois que c'est ce qui se pose maintenant comme question pour nous tous.
And I think that's the issue that we're all facing.
Dans le couple comme dans la relation entre pays.
In relationships as well as in relationships between countries.
Qu'est-ce que je dois faire?
What must I do?
Parce que l'autre est tout à la fois mon reflet et ma limite.
Because the other is both my reflection and my limit.
C'est mon compagnon et c'est ma liberté.
It's my companion and my freedom.
L'autre est nécessaire.
The other is necessary.
Même Dieu a inventé l'autre.
Even God invented the other.
Parce qu'il ne peut pas s'en passer.
Because he cannot do without.
Que voulez-vous que je vous dise d'autre?
What can I say? What can I add?
I'm sorry. I think if you want to ask more questions, you're going to have to find these wonderful writers signing books in the back. Thank you. Can we please give a wonderful round of applause to... So please stick around, get your book signed, have a drink.